All right, my friends, here we are. This is Chance Garton of the Interverse Podcast. Welcome, man. Happy 2023, almost to the Lunar New Year too. So I could say Happy New Year in a couple different ways soon. But how you doing, man? Good to see you.
Are we almost there? Did we? I think we crossed the new moon. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Oh, maybe it's a little earlier than I thought. I thought it was lunar, like maybe the official Chinese New Year is on the 22nd, 23rd. We're here on January 21st, so it's coming up soon, if
Already
not
talking
already
about
here.
calendars and cycles of time.
Yeah.
But the idea of a lunar new year hadn't really ever crossed my mind. And this year, when the new moon, assuming that it happened, or as we're approaching it, maybe it
Mm,
was like right at that waning crescent, but I really felt more of a fresh and like rolled over to the next cycle type of vibe
nice.
around, the last couple, I don't know, maybe like 5 or so days ago. I started to really feel like, okay, now it feels like a new year. And then
Interesting. Yeah.
all the lunar new year thing, that makes kind of more sense in some ways. I like how the ancients did things where they weren't working on just one calendar. They had the solar calendar, they had a lunar calendar, they had a 360-day calendar. Some cultures like Egypt, as far as I know, were running multiple calendars concurrently, which, yeah, that kind of makes sense, for depending on what it is you're trying to track. The fun about calendars is that they're completely they're completely mind-boggling.
Yeah. I'd say that. Yeah.
I really like the quote. I think Dylan said this in one of his books, Dylan Sakosho, that the one thing that the priest class has been consistent at over the ages is being wrong about about cycles of time. And so while I can't verify this, but I have a suspicion that the reason why calendars are so tricky is because maybe the luminaries that we're using as a timepiece don't actually follow a hard and fast, same every time type of rule.
Mm.
You know, when you look at the rest of nature and how there's like some wiggle, all porcupines look like a porcupine, but they all have a little bit of difference to them. They're the same but different. And so I wonder if like maybe there's a bit of a range in like what if the solar year is 365.25 days sometimes, and
Oh
other times
man.
it's 365 days even, and other, like, I don't know what the range would be. I'm not up there, with a telescope and measuring the exact degree in arc seconds of where everything is at, but to me it would make a lot of sense if part of the reason why it's always so confused and muddled is because, and like, it worked for a while and now it doesn't. Maybe, again, this is another another Dylan quote, but he's just full of good stuff.
Mm.
It's almost as if God made everything slightly off from exact and even and whole numbers so that we couldn't ever like put our stamp of we figured it out with our
Right, right.
mathematician hats on, like that we understand the creator or the creation perfectly. And that's great because I, for one, am all about embracing the mystery, the multiplicity, the potentials, right?
Yeah, right on, man. That's a really cool place to begin. And it's kind of funny that we started on calendars because my ritual first question for first time guest, I'm happy to have you on, man. When did you start to speak your truth?
Wow, that's a good question. It's a relative thing. I mean, not that truth is relative, but there are levels of it. The truth I was speaking, when I first started the show, and that might not have even been really the motivation for the show. What is truth, right? What was I thinking about when I first started? I think more about how I could help people see their own potential, see their own divinity, experience deeper levels of reality, wider levels of experience where there's magic and it's hard to say. And then, I started to, I didn't start out podcasting as like a conspiracy guy, honestly. I started out podcasting after having had some very intense psychedelic
Nice.
experiences that basically showed me a temporary, I had like a temporary embodiment of my future self. That's
Mm.
the only way I could put it. Where for a couple of months there in my early 20s, I was like, I just knew a bunch of shit in terms of metaphysical dynamics and like energy.
You
And
received some downloads, they could say.
you could, yeah, it was almost like I got to peek into a window to my future self, but I didn't understand it on the intellectual level or have the foundation or groundwork laid to be able to actually, retain the heightened energy that I experienced from blowing open my chakras with some psychedelics. And I typically approached them with reverence and not purely in a party mindset, but it was definitely not perfect. I neither recommend nor dissuade people from doing that
Same.
themselves. It's up to you, but I did have like this almost samadhi like ability early on where a lot of what I'm now capable of doing in the energy work realm, like without tools and without knowledge of any kind of idea of how it works mechanically, if there even is such a way of understanding it.
Yeah.
Something so purely mental. It just came to me. And I really knew deep down that there's something in my future related to, at the time I was putting it under the idea of shamanism, because it was maybe the first thing that I started really studying in the metaphysical realm, which again, that came from an interest in like expanded consciousness experiences and like what is life. And with like, I almost feel like what I was doing back then was, I'm so keen to like know the answers, and many of us are, but it felt like I went and read the last page of the book of my life.
Skip to the end, yeah.
And I was like, okay, everything's gonna be fine in the end. Oh, okay. And then I kind of like forgot all of that, and went back to where I was in the story.
That's fascinating, man. Like if I think about growing up in a similar way and like getting into Terrence McKenna and Alan Watts, it's like they gave me like
Yeah, I was
some
into that
idea
stuff
of
back then too.
like, yeah, like what to expect at the end. And then I sort of like went backwards and forgot all that and had to relearn it again through different means, through natural organic means, if you want to say that, or maybe in internal means, endogenously. But that's a really cool segue because you brought up, what these experiences, these formative experiences have helped you move into as far as, a service that you provide, which is really fascinating. So as a segue into more of an introduction, could you let people know, one, where to find you and what kind of services do you offer? Because you offer quite a lot, and I'm really excited to learn more about how you got into it and what people can expect if they want to consult with you.
That is fun. Yeah. So, in terms of where people can find me, Innerverse is the name of my show. So, probably at this point, it's the most notorious thing under the name Innerverse. And I think there's a few other people who've laid claim to that particular name for one thing or another. But my website is innerversepodcast.com. My YouTube and my Rockfin channels are a really great way to keep up with my content. And then if people wanted to do one-on-one, as you say, consulting, I kind of like that actually, because it gets lumped into the idea of energy healing, or that like, probably people out there would look at what I do and label me a healer. But that is maybe not the way that I like to look at it. I don't particularly think I'm doing anything to heal somebody. I'm not like a magic man that can, like in a video game, cast a spell and your wounds close and you stop bleeding. If I could do that, trust me, you'd all know about it. I'd probably be in a different line of work, opening a field hospital or something.
Right.
Right. So anyway, the nature of the consulting that I do with people, I really like that. So, I might start calling it sound consulting, or biofield consultation. That might be a good way to put it.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I do though is with the tool of tuning forks, like this big guy I got right here, this bad boy. And I use these tuning forks as a way of detecting imbalances in people's biofield, or the energetic field that their body is. It's kind of like a chicken and an egg thing. Is your body in your energy field, or is your body an expression of your energy field? Or is your energy field created by your body, or is your body the core of your energy field and the most dense and solid aspect of it? I kind of think it's maybe the latter. So we may want to get into more of the mechanics of what is going on with that energy field and how we consult about it. But essentially, I'm using the tuning forks, and then there is a therapeutic aspect to actually having coherent sound that you can hear. Interestingly enough, it actually still works without being able to hear it.
Hmm.
So there's definitely something going on beyond the purely material or in a very subtle aspect of the material. But as you know, I've been hearing go around lately, I think popularizing the phrase, my friend Topher Gardner has been saying it, the subtle informs the gross. So using these very subtle techniques, we're able to help, working together, me and the client. I really like calling it a consultation because what's going on is like we're inquiring with the intelligence of their body,
Mm.
aka their energy field. Where's the imbalances in this energy field that constitute issues with beliefs about themselves or about the world, or unexpressed feelings and emotions that are in order to be held back and unexpressed, or in the form of a limiting belief. This constitutes an actual aberration of energy, in the sense that if you have an energetic capacity innately, and that when it's full, you're at 100%, like a fully charged battery, then these aberrations or vortexes or compartmentalized pockets of life force are holding you back from the full realization and expression of the 100% full battery, style of life.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like with your cell phone or with any other device you might have, it might work fine at 80%, might work fine at 50%, but you start dipping into the under 20%, and
Hmm.
you got problems. And
Yeah,
I think,
yeah.
with our modern technology, that's not a perfect analogy because phones work pretty well up until they're nearly dead. But man, I think a lot of people are a lot closer to dead than they realize.
Could be. It could be. And it's
I'm
interesting
just
that,
kidding, but maybe.
yeah, I mean, if you're listening, you're definitely alive as far as I can tell. But maybe these messages have carried beyond to the next place or the next dimension. But it's pretty cool that, something that you had mentioned is that you don't really need to hear in order to receive or to interact with this energy, this vibration. And I can personally attest that although I've never consulted with you directly, I got to listen in to a really cool episode with Michelle's Healing Home, and shout out to her, by the way. She's been doing great. And what I want to say is, like, I kind of visualized a triangulation of some sort where it's like you've got the sound that's coming from your tuning fork and the client that you're helping. And then there's the biofields between both of you, and the sound is reflecting between this triangulation. And this was something I was listening to through my car speakers as I was driving, and I heard the sound. I wasn't there in the room with you, and Michelle was on a Zoom call or StreamYard or something like that, and still this energy was able to pass through. And I'm curious, if I'm thinking
You weren't
about,
even listening to it live, right? It
yeah,
was a
exactly. It was a
recording
recording.
later.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Like the temporal aspect was like taken out of place. And when I'm thinking about the biofield, another visual is the toroidal field. It's flowing in a parallel system up and down, kind of like a fluid magma. I think what's
Let's
that
just
that
call
fr-
it a donut.
the
I
the
just call it the
donut. Yeah,
donut.
yeah, yeah,
Your donut.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So I'm kind of curious because I I'm reminded of this principle of like a radio tower almost, or like a radio receiver, where if your nervous system isn't attuned properly, like if you have some imbalances or inflammation of some sort, then the static will increase and your signal won't be very clear. You won't be able to access those higher radio waves, those higher frequencies. And so, like, if you were to consult with someone or try to help someone who feels like maybe their aura or their nervous system isn't really properly attuned, like, where do you start? Like, do you question them? Do you have any like kind of process that you like to lead people through? Like, what could people expect if they come to you with some kind of issue?
Yeah, let me get to that, but I want to back up a bit
Sure.
and even more clearly express a metaphor for what is going on there. Because you use the phrase triangulation, but one of the great things about it is, and you have, you notice this, the temporal aspect isn't even important. Like you weren't there live and you were
Right.
still feeling something. I would call it more rather than a triangulation, it's like a singularityation.
Yeah, I like that.
Singularation.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the experience of being able to wave tuning forks around in my living room with the while I'm on a call with somebody in another country and tell them things about themselves that they didn't tell me first, specific stuff. To me, that is an expression of the reality of what life force energy really is, which I think is super helpful foundational gnosis. And take it or leave it, but with consulting with somebody who does biofield tuning or other authentic energy balancing modalities, you can have, especially when you do it remotely, you can have a now experiential knowing of what I'm talking about, the singularity of life force energy. So what I mean by that is, if you strip down all of, take away all of the descriptors and the identifications with who you are. I'm not saying ego is bad or kill your ego or whatever, but if you strip down everything that you think that you are, remove every memory, remove every context of location and environment and etc., eventually you would get just down to the core feeling and sense of I exist, I am, right? So for everything that exists, including supposedly inanimate objects, in my opinion, everything that is part of the I am, I exist paradigm is at its root, at its core, at its essence, it is the exact same energy.
Mm.
So, like my idea, people will use, and myself included, I used to describe what goes on with tuning under the lens of this has to do with like there's something about the ether here. It's something about ether, but I've kind of backed off on that because part of the reason maybe that ether was never widely accepted in modern times is because there's like real problems with the contradictory nature of what is attempting to be described.
Mm.
So for me, I just jettison the whole idea that there's some kind of physical interconnecting medium. Okay, I say jettison. I'm not jettisoning it completely. I mean, we know that there's a physical interconnecting medium just in the sense that there's water inside me, there's water in the atmosphere, there's
Right.
water in the water. we're all underwater, right?
Right.
So like, I would just not even call it ether. I would just be like water. Water has something to at play here. But essentially, what I'm trying to get at is that the life force energy that animates all things and is the eternal self-existing conscious and creative intelligence of capital R reality is one and indivisible. So that means that the spirit, you could call it spirit, the prana, the chi in me, not only is it connected to the chi in you or the chi in anybody, anywhere, everywhere, it's not even separate. It's not like there's a chunk of chi in me and then there's a chunk of chi
One
in
single
you.
ocean.
Exactly. It is, in my opinion, life force energy is the aspect of reality that is preliminary to everything dimensional. And by dimensional, I mean as in measurement, like
Mm.
forward, backward, left, right, up, down, time, space, all that. I think that it's beyond time and space. And thus, it could also be equated with the Hermetic axiom of mentalism, the all is mind, that your mind itself is life force energy in expression, in motion. And so, I mean, I'm being a little maybe verbose about it, but what I'm getting at is that because life force, this energy, this preliminary, what's the word, proto energy of that is everything.
Mm.
It takes on the shape of its container. It is also equivalent to the idea of consciousness or awareness. So the more of your life force you have access to, you haven't cut yourself off from. And I know that might even sound contradictory because I'm saying that it can't be divided, and that like the full universal, all that ever was life
You
force.
think about water pressure though, like you could, bend a what's it called, a hose, and the water pressure will decrease. You can interrupt the flow almost and change the water pressure. That's kind of how I picture it.
That's actually a really good analogy. Yeah, that's a really good analogy. So you mentally, because the idea of separation and distance is mental, and you know this experientially if you do a remote tuning session, and I can tell you, what is going on with you, and you never gave me any heads up about it.
Yeah.
And this isn't to say I'm special. Other people could learn to do this. So I'm like, it's a language, honestly. But what I mean by all of this that I'm trying to get at is that, you know, the you never were separate from that 20% or that 40% of your life force that you're not accessing. It's just that you decided not to access it.
Mm,
So
that
like
makes perfect sense.
the limitations are purely mental in nature, to be fair. So anyway, I'm sure I could say more about all that, but to, give you the actual answer to the question you originally posed, what someone could expect in a session with me in tuning is that, we'll spend a couple minutes talking up front where basically I'm just giving them, similar to what I'm going to describe now, the full idea of like what we're about to go through,
Mm.
along with setting intentions. And the setting of intentions, try this, try this at home, kids. I
Safe and
simply
effective.
I simply invoke that very life force energy, eternal, self-existing, Yad He Vav He, and creator and animator of all things, the supreme being, not as like a noun, being is a verb, supreme being, the all being everywhere at once, that is all of us. I invoke this supreme being, and I just ask to be the instrument of its will to expand and to be whole and to be in flow, as you put it. So I throw out the intentions, and then we get into the tuning process. Before that, I do some dowsing using dowsing rods to expedite the process of like discovery of where there might be imbalances. That really speeds it up. And then we find the holes of your donut. The toroidal field, as you describe, the top and bottom holes of this toroidal field ought to be aligned with your spine, and they ought to be about 12 to 14 inches off your head and below your feet. For most people I check in with, they're at least a little bit off, if not kind of a lot off. So then I move those into place. It's like the method for me on the practitioner side is like, imagine that the tuning fork is like a computer mouse, and I'm just doing like a click and drag.
Interesting. Yeah, reorganizing the files, if you will.
Yeah, but you could also look at it like an N64 controller
Mm.
with a vibration pack. So
Nice.
like when I find what I'm looking for, I get the hint that I found it, except the vibration pack is in my skull.
Yeah, I've heard you describe this. Like you will get like a clicking. You want to describe what you meant by that? Because I think I've heard you say it was like your ears click, or you like get some kind of like physical reaction when you pick up on something. For example, like when I had practiced and received Reiki, it was like you would feel heat in certain areas of someone's body, and then the colder parts of their body were in they had a greater need for energy. Like there was something going on there. So how would you describe your physical response when you're doing
Yeah,
it?
and that's something that kind of, well, totally came about from me practicing. It wasn't part of the method I learned. And I need to back up slightly
Sure.
and tell people like I wouldn't know anything about the modality of biofield tuning without Eileen Day McCusick,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
author of Electric Body, Electric Health and Tuning the Human Biofield, whose work and products you can find at the Biofield Tuning Store. Highly recommend people get hip to her entire catalog of offerings, and like she's a guru for me unofficially. I mean, maybe more of a friend than a guru, but in terms of somebody that actually has changed my life in a massive way, like a mentor, without what I like about the way she did that was she didn't have to do anything special for me. All she did was like put out her work and her findings, and
Yeah.
in such a
Yeah.
clear way that I was able to follow along. And so reading her books, I was able to start to implement the method in creatively in the way that felt right for me and explore it. And then in the exploration of it, and I'm positive that Qigong practice has something to do with my sensitivity and being able to
That's interesting.
more
Yeah.
easily, manage the energy, if you will, that I discovered eventually along the way that it would click. My ears would pop. There would be clicks in my head whenever I found what I was looking for. And now it is like it took me a while to fully trust it, but now I'm at the point where I so fully trust it that I can use it for anything. It's like a weird superpower. And so this is what I mean though when I say that the life force energy animating your body vessel is not separate from all universal
Mhm.
life force energy in the whole creation, which would mean that your body or the life force energy in your body is not really separate. It knows everything already.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so it really just falls on us to figure out a way to communicate with that innate intelligence of our being. And the simplest way to do that is to come up with a system of yes or no answers. There are other methodologies that have figured this out, like kinesiology and muscle testing. And so I don't claim that it's the best way, it's my way. And other
Yeah.
people could probably
Exactly.
learn. And, if it sounds like far out, uh, but you're willing to experiment, try asking your body questions, man.
Oh yeah. Do some
Like,
energy testing. Yeah.
ask your body, show me a method that I can get yes or no answers
Mhm.
from you, body, and see what happens. I would love to find, I imagine that there could be a bunch of different ways that someone could, like you
Yeah.
described with Reiki, the hot and the cold.
Right.
Sounds like a very similar modality because we know that the feeling of hot and cold, although is influenced by the external environment, of course, it is possible to have feelings of hot and cold that are not really externally influenced. Like if you've ever had the chills, or if you ever had a
Mhm.
fever, and it's super hot in the room but you're freezing, or whatever, that's something going on internally. So your feelers are able to uh alter themselves internally based on what might be necessary. And like the fever or the chills, they have something to do with helping your body to purge or expel or aligns whatever is going on that needs to be worked with. That's another key thing for people out there that may not be thinking this way yet, to look at what the mainstream calls symptoms, which are the enemy to the allopathic,
Mhm.
as your best friend. Whatever form of discomfort or pain, dissonance, what have you, go through it, go into it. And it's through it is where your relief is, or where your balance or your health or your healing, your detox, whatever. And I already was thinking this way, but it really clicked home when I was talking to Elise from Family Fungi about
Mm.
empowered childbirth and what it's like to go through the process of bringing another life through your womb portal without anyone there but you and your husband, which is what
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
she talked about, and how she was like, the baby is on the other side of the pain. The hospital, they try to numb out all that pain, but actually the pain in the childbirth is joyful if you realize that that's where your baby's at. Think about, for parents out there, or anyone that knows parents, which is everybody.
True.
A lot of parents would walk through fire to save their baby. They would
Right.
walk, they'd be like, my baby's on the other side of that pain, and they would just do it. Well, you can look at all of the good, true, and beautiful that you might be feeling separate from as on the other side of or through whatever the pain or dissonance is that you're currently experiencing. So rather than masking or suppressing your body's ability to self-regulate, which is what all symptoms are, is an attempt to self-regulate. The body never does anything that is bad for it.
Mhm.
The body's not stupid. Your body's not broken. Your immune system is not attacking you. What if you don't, what if the immune system idea is not even really accurate? I like to call immunity, I rephrase it to I'm unity,
I'm
because
unity.
when
Yes.
you're in unity with all things, then yeah, you're definitely not attacked by some external demonic boogeyman, germ
Mhm.
ninja, whatever
Germ ninja.
these alien tiny little creatures are that
Yeah.
everyone's so
Yeah.
fucking scared of.
The invisible
So
enemy.
anyway, to circle back around to finish the answer fully, we find the holes of the donut, we get those aligned, and then using the tuning forks, although I could do it without them if I wanted to, I like to have the props. And I also think there's benefit to coherent sound outside of this process. But I find where the stuck energy is off, left, right, front, back of the body. I click and drag it back into position. If it's particularly sticky and it's not really moving without coming out into an expression of speaking it out loud, then I might say something like, okay, so did your mom leave your family or pass away or something when you were around 3 or when you're around 5 or whatever? And then I might not be exactly right, but they'll
You're like
say,
probing a little bit.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, I have reason to think what I think
Yeah.
because the anatomy of the biofield is such that if I found energy off balance that was stuck behind and to the left of about the solar plexus height of the client, then I would know, well, it has something to do with feeling not supported by their mom. And then there's another element to the process that's a little more mysterious where the full idea sometimes will just pop into my head, randomly. But at the end of the day, whether or not I got it exactly right, they'll know what it refers to. I
Yeah.
might say, like, this is a specific example. I had a client where I was like, uh, what happened with your mom? Did she, leave or whatever? At the age of 3 is what I was guessing. I was like, when you were really little, maybe a toddler or a baby, was your mom out of the picture? And then she told me that she had to stay at she lived in China and she had to stay with a nanny for
Mm.
up to a week at a time and her parents weren't there. And I was like, okay, well that kind of is an equivalent. Your parents are working for a week at a time and you see them maybe one day a week. But then I found out a little later in the session that actually, though, at about 5, her mom did leave her family entirely.
Wow.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so my first guess was right, but the age I guessed I was sort of wrong, but it was already kind of happening before that age. Anyway, that's an example of how like some of the stuff that we need to get to the core of
Yeah. And
might
to
have to be
quickly
spoken
clarify,
outside or
yeah.
spoken out loud, I should say.
Right. To quickly clarify, did you kind of like deduce that this was a maternal issue because it was on the left side as opposed to the right side? Is that kind of how you figured that out?
Actually, actually, I think I was like tuning her knees or
Mm.
something, maybe like in her ankles. And the idea of your mom isn't around came into my mind fully formed. I
Wow. Yeah.
wasn't
Like
even,
the entire idea just,
yeah. And
wow.
when I first started, I was really sus of stuff like that. And I was like, I would mentally torture myself, like, should I say it? I
Mm.
think that your dog died when you were 7, but that's so random and specific. And then I would just be like, did this maybe happen at this time? And they'd be like, yes, that
Mm.
did. And then anyway, so it was eventually something I could just trust. And now, even though it's maybe not 100%, sometimes I can still play a trick on myself. And it's almost like the experience of shamanic journeying, internal world journeying, where you're like using the drum and rattle track. And this was one of the early parts of my exploration of consciousness, was this particular technique where you sort of go into a trance state where you're really just surfing on the edge of paying attention and letting go at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
So the key to staying in the zone there, and it's really like zone practice, is that you observe all the images and things coming up into your mind without trying to then be like, oh, that must be this, and then like
Mhm.
letting your letting your pattern recognition device that is that part of your mind come up with like an explanation. So I still surf that a little bit. Like every once in a while, I might throw something out there that ends up being inaccurate, and it's more like it maybe is because like I have read into it a little more than what the initial flash of insight was. But the
Mhm.
funny thing about even when that happens is that it ends up being interpretable or relevant to something we come up with elsewhere that really does matter. So,
Mm.
because I give the process up to supreme being, I invoke their higher self and my higher self in the intention setting. I truly only just want to help. Like,
Right.
there's other ways that I could make a living than tuning people, but uh plenty of ways. I truly just want to be of assistance and be that mediator between themselves and their own energy field and what they're hiding from themselves. I think that there's like a divine level of guidance in that where uh and anyone out there that can like honestly and fully truly say that they just want to help in whatever modality that they're putting themselves out there to offer, that if you know that you are trustworthy, then just trust yourself.
Exactly.
Trust your
Exactly.
if you're really trustworthy, then you can trust yourself. I mean, it sounds really simple, right? But it is a practice of letting go of like the what if I'm wrong? Then
Mm,
they'll think that I'm inauthentic or I'm fake or whatever, or I just won't look as good. And you let all that go and you just express what comes up and what comes through in full faith and trust that in the process of what we're doing in this ceremony of tuning, that the wrong thing won't happen, that exactly the right thing is the only thing that ever happened anyway, anywhere, including during that ceremony. So I give it up to the most high and I just let it rip and we just see where it goes. And people come back from more than one session fairly often, so it tells me that it must be valuable to them. And there have been some fascinating, specific, and even occasionally dramatic
mm.
results.
I want to
you
ask
know
you about that in a second. First of all, namaste, brother, because that was a really cool answer, and I didn't expect to go in a couple different directions like that. And there's one thing that you've reminded me of, which is earlier you had said you kind of like surf this phenomenon, and you've probably seen this Venn diagram image. It's like discipline on one side and surrender on the other side, and the middle of the Venn diagram is flow. And that's really cool. That's kind of what I was thinking about when you kind of explained this process of trusting. And I'm grateful that you've fully leaned into that, because I know you've been helping a lot of people. And one thing in particular, I quickly want to mention that you told this really cool story about someone who was purging after going through their experience on 9/11, and that's fascinating to me. But I wanted to ask you as well about etymology, language, and how that's accompanying your practice. Because when I was listening to your session with Michelle, I picked up on the fact, and I didn't know this was gonna like this was my first time kind of witnessing this. So it was really cool. I didn't know what to expect. So you were creating the sound, I guess, or you're tuning, and then you were giving almost like words of affirmation, and there was a theme behind it. It was a theme of like, you don't have to be grinding and hustling all day every day. You can take a break, you can give yourself a day off, or you don't have to stress your energy so much. And that's the specific particular point that I was able to witness on that podcast. I was wondering if you wanted to explain a bit about that method of introducing language and maybe these words of affirmation, if you call it that, into your practice while you're doing these tunings.
Yeah, it's an awesome question, man. Probably we were dealing with the energies around the root chakra on the right
Mm,
side of the right hip area, where so there's like a very common, it's particularly common in Western nations, or used to be. I think maybe the left side imbalance is getting more common lately, but that's a side note, that the right hip can hold on to the sense or the belief that we must be productive at the expense of our own well-being,
mm,
right? I mean, even though people probably aren't internally holding the thought and belief of, I gotta grind now, and if I just work hard enough, then any health problems that I incur, I can pay for later because I made so much money. That's the car repair, car mechanic model of health that we've been sold by
mm.
insurance companies and the mainstream medical establishment, aka the mafia.
True, true, true.
Well, we should just call them what it is. It's the mafia. But
Mm,
so there are ways that we can reframe our own the beliefs about ourselves or what we want. And we can do that with language. Language is a good operating system for it. And essentially, though, with the area of the biofield you're talking about, the reason why people typically, the motivation that makes people prone to overwork themselves to the point of self harm is because they feel guilty that they aren't productive enough.
Hmm.
And this is a problematic way of operating for a lot of reasons, but particularly that, okay, so it works on this overlap between the root chakra and the sacral chakra, where the tangential area of the sacral chakra to the root in this right hand side, more in the front, facing forward, what's in front of you, holds on to the energy of guilt and shame. So because there's this tangential, these parts of the energy fields of the root and sacral relating to overworking and guilt and shame are touching each other, it implies, and it ends up being largely true, that people's overworking is happening at the rate of feeling, or at the reason of feeling guilty if they don't, even if it's just kind of internal. So all that being said, you are perfectly welcome to work as hard as you want. We could easily just fall back on the cliche of the destination is not as important as the journey or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Because whenever you're so goal focused or destination oriented, I'm not saying don't have goals. I'm not saying to not choose a destination, but whenever it's like, I won't be happy until I've done X amount, or I've done
Very
this.
conditional.
Well, it's that conditional, and that's perfect because we're talking about with the sacral overlap that goes on here. The best way to describe healthy, like if you could just pick one word to express the healthy feeling given to us by the sacral chakra, it is satisfaction. Root chakra is more like security. If you had to boil it down to one word, all of these areas of our energy field relate to a lot of parts of life, but security and then satisfaction, kind of, those are the levels of this totem pole in their most pure essence. And so whenever you're operating from that, I'll be satisfied with X that's in the future, forward, front part of the biofield, right? Future oriented. Well, no matter where you are in the future, in proximity to that, I'll be satisfied with X when Y. When you get to X and Y, the goalpost will be pushed further out because it's not really about the thing itself that you're working on, or the productivity itself, or the time frame itself, or the journey itself. It's about the configuration of your energy field. So what you're craving on the simplest level is this part of yourself that you've pushed away in front of yourself, mostly to the right in this example, and you really want that. You're like, you feel incomplete without it. And it's just right there. But then as you move towards it, because you're keeping it out in front of you and to the right, as you move forward, it moves forward with you, and it just stays out of reach in that zone, metaphorically speaking. So when it comes to the affirmative aspect, or the language aspect that you initially asked me about, it's like, even if you don't strongly resonate with the issue of I'm not satisfied until I'm X amount of productive, or I've done a certain thing, you can still at any point choose the belief about yourself that you want to hold. So the belief about yourself that you might want to just reprogram yourself with, or decide on right now in this moment, as we're talking about this particular element of our energy field, would be, I am satisfied with myself, period. I am satisfied with myself. Or
exclamation point.
Yeah. Yeah. Or like, I work hard when it's in flow. I work hard when it's, but not at the expense of my well-being. You can still have the belief of like, I'm a hard worker. Yeah, great. Work ethic is awesome. And the key is, though, back to that idea of the discipline on one side, and I don't really like surrender, but let's say flexibility.
Flexibility is good. Yeah, I like
discipline and flexibility, this polarity, and in the middle of it is flow. Well, that's exactly a great way to look at your productivity. And also, like, it is, you are allowed to rest. And even though it might feel like you are not producing, and like we're programmed by these 40-hour-a-week jobs, and how all that universe works of the corporate slave monkey game. The sense of I'm resting doesn't necessarily equate to the sense of like I'm getting sharper, I'm getting stronger, but it is.
Hmm.
But I'm not saying like, there might be times in your life where you just go ham, like you're doing you from wake up to fall asleep, you're like getting all kinds of stuff done. Why don't we just stop worrying about some kind of larger constellation of success defined by something material in any way or an accomplishment or something, and instead just honestly do the best you can every day while putting your own well-being at the highest priority and dismissing any sense of guiltiness or
Hmm.
shame that is unwarranted, you know? And that's pretty long-winded, but
No, no, well said,
you
well
know,
said. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's interesting too. I mean, I picked up on this particular word you just used, which is constellation. It's like a constellation of success. And I'm sure you can probably guess where I'm going with this. Like one thing that I definitely know for sure, like deep in my being, is that kind of like what I was saying earlier with like the radio frequency. Like I cannot contemplate higher truths, if you want to call it that, if my biofield isn't adjusted properly. Like if there's some kind of imbalance, then I won't be concerned about the constellations or whatever is above and beyond me. As above, so below. It's almost like I've got to take care of my physical, my mental, my spiritual form before I can contemplate anything beyond that. That being said, everything is connected through this one fluid medium. But one thing in particular that you said was constellation. And I really want to ask you about astrotheology in a long winded segue. And it's something
no,
that I've,
great segue.
thank
You're
you. Thank
welcome.
you.
I set you right up.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Yeah. People will probably, if they've
Hold
never
on. Can
heard
you
of,
hold the thought for a second?
yeah, of course.
And
Of
I,
course.
I just, I do want to get into that, but what you just said is super important. I just want to highlight where you had made the point that whenever I'm not in full energetic balance and integrity, that I don't have the capacity to contemplate higher truths or
Right.
the bigger picture of things. That's really helpful gauge of where you're at,
Mhm.
actually. If your thoughts are mostly consumed with escapism or gratification or whatever, it's probably a good sign that there's something out of whack or some part of your energy that needs to be brought back into flow. And I'm not saying that having fun can't be a part of the equation. I'm a bothist.
Bothist. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually in energetic integrity, you can do all kinds of shit that somebody that is more like afraid of their diet being slightly off, or like a slight piece of juice from meat will make me no longer a good boy, or
Right.
what, whatever the case may be. Sorry, vegans, I'm not trying to rip on you. I used to be you. It's all good.
Me too.
Um, my point, just simplify this and quit being so long-winded. My point being that the ancient idea that all learning is remembering, I think it's like a
Mhm.
Platonic idea. It totally applies. In fact, it applies really well to what I was describing right at the beginning of how I had this temporary embodiment of my future self
Mhm.
when I was a lot younger. And I think that's because this life force energy that we're talking about, that we either have a full experience of or are in some way diminished, it is also our consciousness and it's our spirit and it's who we are. So the more access we have to the full capacity of our battery of ourself, the more we start to remember. So like what I what I would point out about this is maybe people can point in their own life to an example of what I'm describing, that there are certain epiphanies I've had about the nature of life or about myself or about spirituality or metaphysics, that epiphanies that were just like, poof, whoa. And they blew my mind, and like, I'll never forget that. That's such a huge download or whatever you want to call it. And then I kind of like, I'm back on my bullshit and totally
Mhm.
forget about it. And then like 2 months or 2 years or however long later, I'll be like really strong again. I'll do a cleanse or I'll like get my shit together. And then all of a sudden it's like, I remember that thing.
Exactly.
Like, how did I
Yes.
forget that? That was like
Right.
key. That was some key shit that like
Mhm.
totally helped me understand myself. And I totally forgot it. I think that It's exactly what I'm describing, that
Yeah.
your energy
Yeah.
body is also your capacity to remember who you are and how things, and to see the interconnectivity in all things, because at the end of the day, what nature is a big giant infinite ecosystem of everything everywhere all at once, in
Oh,
constant touch
awesome
and
film.
communication with itself and each other. So, this actually ties into transhumanism, which is, at its core, the attempt to route all information and consciousness and, directive of action and thought through a CPU, through one
Right.
route, like all routed to one central location, and then orders given back out to every other location from the central. Your body doesn't work that way. It's not like you need your fingertips to talk to your brain and your brain is controlling every part of your body from, head to toe, but that you want your fingertips to be connected to your knees and your hips to be connected to your ankles, and like
Mhm.
every part of you to be in constant communication with every other part of you, which is how your body is able to go about doing what it needs to do to shuffle one type of resource, physical internal resource, to another part of itself in, instantaneous transmission. The
Yeah.
soil does this, mycelial networks, trees that can send their nutrients to other trees miles away within moments when it, is known that they're needed, or all of this is how nature works. It's this big system of intercommunication,
The cloud, if you will.
interconnectivity. Yeah. So anyway, very long-winded interruption. Let's continue with your
Hey, it's all right.
segue
No,
there.
that interjection is really cool because you reminded me of something I kind of wanted to bring up earlier. Another like visual representation. You talk about like you could consume a certain substance or just have a spontaneous experience and your chakras are blown wide open. I kind of imagine like, let's think about the toroidal concept of kundalini. It's flowing up and down your spine. And when you have these experiences, it's almost like you're taking the elevator all the way up and the doors open and you get to look in, but the elevator is like gonna go back down eventually. And then like so every now and then, you get your diet right, your sleep right, your relationships right, and that elevator will eventually be able to reach that top floor again and give you those insights that you previously have forgotten or have lost access to. So I'm glad that you reminded me of that because it's a motivational influence for me to continue with my personal practices. I know we all have different lifestyle, different diet, etc. And whatever that thing is that you can do to help that elevator flow smoothly up and down, that's what we got to do. And so I appreciate that your services help people to take back the power that might be maybe like society, culture, etc. Their loosh is being taken away. That's just to use one form of that symbolic reference to energy vampirism and things like that. So when we're considering other higher concepts, I've heard you talk about astrotheology a lot. This ties into etymology. It's a topic that I feel like, I wasn't raised with a religious structure, so I've always been curious because I got lucky in that sense. I didn't have to identify to one tribe or creed. I was open to all of it. And so now I'm starting to hear about these other interpretations. It's really cool. I'll borrow a phrase from Miguel Connor of Aeon Byte. He would say astronosis. I, th- I I think it's pretty cool because when we think about the luminaries in the sky and these characters, these archetypes in these ancient texts, there's a clear connection there that I'm starting to care about more because it's influencing my worldview, and I feel like there's just something about it. There's this old wisdom that maybe has been lost or even suppressed in some cases. And I'm curious where you want to start if you were to introduce people to the concept of astrotheology and how you've personally interacted with this huge, broad topic. What would you say?
Astrotheology is a huge topic. It is probably overall one of the most useful tools in the whole kit for helping break somebody out of the, I would call it the mysticism madness.
Yeah,
And I refer to this a lot, but one of my all-time faves, Wilhelm Reich, in
yeah.
his book Ether, God and Devil, he really does an awesome job pointing out that, yeah, we're all probably pretty hip to how mechanistic thinking is super limiting and trying to break everything down to its components and parts, like the left-brained worldview of scientism, which is a cult, often does, where you know the scientist is the priest and they tell you what's true and you accept it because you don't have the tools to look at the tiny little parts in the microscope and all that shit.
Mm.
Well, mysticism is the same thing, and that's also very lost. It's maybe more lost, in the conspiracy crowd, if you will, people that are interested in researching conspiracy. Well, it's pretty evident how the mechanistic scientism cult is running amok, but symbolically, if you have any form of symbolic literacy, it doesn't take very much investigation to see that, well, this cult of scientism and the white lab coats of the doctors, they utilize the same symbols as the priest class. What's that about? As Michael Tessarion says, you are brought into the world by the white coat and you're taken out of the world by the black robe.
Exactly.
It's the same cradle to grave. It's the same, it's the same network and mafia that we've allowed to run amok by giving up our own power and our own capacity to the technologies offered by this particular cult. So astrotheology is really great for helping bust somebody out of the mysticism mindset. But the issue with that is, that I see even with a lot of my own friends in the community of synchromystic researchers and all that, is a lot of them still drink the Kool-Aid pretty heavy. And I am not like going to tell somebody that their subjective mystical experiences are invalid, but they're subjective. They're not like shared reality, consensus truth that we should be like, evangelizing. I'm not calling out anybody specific here.
It's just like
We've all
the
been
same
guilty of it.
phenomenon. Like you and I will go to sleep tonight and we'll have different dreams, and those are just subjective experiences. We cannot have, maybe it's possible, but like shared dreaming, but individually we're gonna have different visions. Yeah. It's a different podcast maybe, but
yeah. But what I'm getting at there is just that it's not helpful, in my opinion, to try to pass off your own mystical experiences as some kind of gospel that is going to be verifiable by other people, or that they should just take your word for it because you said so, because then we're doing exactly the same thing that the cult of scientism and the mechanist does. So it's like mysticism is the right brain imbalance where you take the dogma from the guy in the black robe, and then mechanism is the left brain dogma where you take the because I said so from a guy in a white coat. It's the same thing. Either way, it's an imbalanced thinking. Now, with so like again, to just finish hammering this point home, when we make discoveries in syncretism or in astrotheology, a lot of times the feeling is like we're being led along in this path of amazing mystical synchronicity that is, things are falling in our lap, and it's like very easy for people to take the bait of the new age where you're like, I'm rolling with Isis. Isis is my goddess, or like some other fictional character. Guys, I did an exercise to meet my spirit guides one time, and I met Gandalf the Wizard.
Gray, or Gandalf the White, I guess.
Doesn't take away the value of the stuff that I got in that little meeting and communication in my own psychic realm. But to try to, to me, that's my subjective evidence that these fictional characters that are mythological heroes and gods are accessible in the psyche. They live in our imaginations. They have a type of egregoric existence that feels separate, but the key is to understand that we animate that. And if we want to be like the New Age, New Cage movement offers slaves to a different kind of mind-muddled delusion of sort of religious fervor, or my team is better than your team. I like the Norse pantheon. That's my team, and we're the special ones. Whatever tradition you like, and if you derive useful morality or understanding of nature, your world, or yourself through it, good, great. But let's put the brakes on trying to say that like because I met Odin in a vision, that means he's real, even though I can demonstrably show how Odin is Thoth, is Mercury, is Buddha, etc., is Jesus, etc. You know, they're fictional characters. This is a literary tradition we're dealing with, and the origins of the literary tradition does appear to be astrotheology. At the core of what we're talking about in this whole podcast, not just in the astrotheology subject matter, is we're discussing the technology of language.
Right.
Now, the biofield anatomy is a language that allows you to communicate with the intelligence of your body, and it's a very useful language at that. What's interesting is the definition of technology as we use it today refers to things like devices, like, you know, our cell phone or something. That's a technology. Usually electronics is what we end up putting under the label, but technically everything is a technology that externalizes, plagiarizes, or what have you, some innate ability that you had or that nature could do, and now you've created a type of shortcut to it. Now, that's not in and of itself bad. Interesting, though, is to look back on the older definition of technology in the previous time. If you go to the Webster's 1828 dictionary, which is my favorite, and you can find it online, and don't come at me like, oh, it's online, so it must be corrupt, or like they could change the definitions or whatever. I don't care. It's good how it is.
Yeah,
you know, no one's going and fucking with the Webster's Dictionary 1828.com because nobody's using it.
Like, if it really comes to that, we'll just log on to the Wayback Machine.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever. The point is, though, that in the older usage of the word technology, it was a description of arts, or a treatise on the arts, or alternative definition was an explanation of the terms of the arts.
Interesting.
So when I'm talking about the language of the biofield anatomy, then it's actually a technology. Think about the terms of art is a phrase that is extremely important, especially in a legalistic sense, because the whole reason such terms of art ever came about was due to the occultation of skill sets and knowledges that different castes and types of what you would call professions would have. So whenever you were, for example, like ancient India, all of the stonemasons had a guild, right? And they kept their secrets to themselves. All the blacksmiths had a guild. They kept their trade secrets to themselves. One of the ways that they did that was obscuring what they were talking about through the terms of art. And we see this still prominent today in the particularly grabbled professions such as lawyers, doctors, but it really applies everywhere. So doctors have a jargon. Lawyers have legalese. That is right. A huge side topic. But the point is that these terms of art are a technology. And that's fascinating to me because you can it's a two-way street with this is like that. That means that is like this. So when we say that language is a technology, then we're saying technology is language. And interestingly, the original definition of technology is actually referring to language. I find that super interesting. But
there's a lot of interesting correspondences there too, because when you talked about art, I immediately thought of Prospero from Shakespeare's The Tempest, because Prospero refers to his magic because he's like an occult representation of John Dee, people say, from the Elizabethan court, the court astrologer, etc. So Prospero refers to magic as his art. And what he's doing is he's got a wand or a special jacket, and he's using language to cast spells. And that's his art. That's his tool, his trade. And it's pretty cool that you brought it back to language being this quote unquote tech, this tech that is accessible to all of us in various forms too. Like if someone is on Team Odin, that's like saying, oh, if you speak English, you're superior than someone who speaks Spanish. It's just different languages to describe a unified principle of this realm, this place that we're cohabiting together. It's cool.
And astrotheology does represent a very good candidate for a unified principle or a unified language or technology. And to really go in deep into astrotheology, is a fun ride and it never ends, which is
Mhm.
why I find it so fascinating and I love it in the sense that because things, mythological stories and miracle tales are encoded in the sky many different ways. Like, one story, for example, Noah's Ark, where you have the dove element, there's more than one dove up there. So, you could look at it from multiple angles and still find all the elements of your story. And most of the angles or ways of looking at it or looking up there are lost on us because we've lost the Kabbalah or the secret transmission.
Mm.
These terms of the arts were maybe nobody guarded their terms of art more than the astronomer priests. They
Yeah,
were
yeah.
real guarded about it. So, and interestingly enough, for a long time, they were the only ones that even had the technology of written language. So their
Mm.
terms of art became externalized into the form of letters. They're the men of letters, keeping us in fetters, as I like to say. Not that I want to blame them. I don't.
But that was the
Don't.
original gatekeeping, you could say. It was language itself or written language itself. Yeah.
I honestly think that the fall from the state of all knowingness that humanity may have originally experienced rather than being monkeys. I think it was a descent, not an ascent, right?
Mm.
Devolution, not evolution per se. But only devolution in our beliefs, in our minds, because our capacities never really shifted that much anyway. Uh, what I started to realize recently was how technology is something that replaces an innate ability that we had, like the folklore knowledge of what herbs to use for what ailments was replaced by going to the doctor or having the doctor come to your house and they give you the petrochemical pill.
Right.
So in that's a good example. Or like the ability to keep your clothing clean, wash it in the river, hang it up to dry, whatever abilities there might have been was shortcutted by the washer and dryer. And if we take that to heart and we expand it out as far as that thought experiment goes, which really starts to push on the boundaries of what we can imagine,
Mm.
and we start to conceptualize that everything that we use as a technology or a device is an externalization of an innate ability that we have. And in fact, a plagiarization of some potential that exists in consciousness, in life force that was always there. Then you start to think like, maybe we have this ability to talk through a Zoom call like we are right now, not because of technology, but the technology is our explanation on the terms of the arts or a
Mm.
description of the arts. And the art in this case being the art of communicating psychically, visually, and auditorially. That we could, what's boiling down to the essence of what's going on here is the one life force energy has created a story of Jake and Chance and that they're talking to each other, but they're in different places far away. So what's the story or what's the description on how that happened? Well, there's a series of tubes and pipes and there's like juice going through them. And in that juice it's electric. And in the message and the faces are in there and it's going from one screen to the other.
There's
Like
this
we don't even know how
crazy
the fuck that
invisible
works.
force called Wi-Fi. Yeah.
Dude, it's magic.
It
It's
is magic.
basically
Yeah.
magic. I mean, I
Mm.
know that maybe there's people out there that can mechanically break it down somewhat how it works, but nobody has ever explained to me how in an electrical signal in a cord is all the information that we call data that comes through our computers. Like to me, I'm just like over here thinking, yeah, this is just the story. This is just the cover story for the fact that we're psychic infinite beings that could communicate with each other across any distance because distance is conceptual and separation is a mental idea. Provably so whenever you do something like remote biofield tuning.
Great full circle moment right there. Yeah.
Well, so when you really take that idea to the full extent and you look at astrotheology and written language and letters, it starts to become maybe possible that at an earlier time in our development, what we used as our technology, our explanation of the terms of the art to conceptualize everything that we are, everything the world is, all the cycles of nature, and what we do in the hero's journey as individuals was up there in the as above.
Mhm.
And that we had some kind of psychic, leniency in ourselves, that Akashic record of the above, which is, it's fascinating. The fascinating thing about the as above, and I know that from every part of the world you can't see every part of the sky at once. That's true, but you can see a lot of it at once.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of like the amount of the night sky that you could see at once is kind of akin to how you can see only not quite 180 degrees at any given
Yeah,
time,
but
or
that
that,
peripheral boundary is quite
yeah,
large
that
if you're
dualism,
looking.
that
Yeah.
yin and
Yeah.
yang, that polarity of like, I can see the front of this cup, but not the back. But if I
Hmm.
turn it, I can see this side, but now I can't see the other side.
Yeah.
But it's still like a big fucking picture, literally
Mhm.
a big picture book in the sky. That's what this astrotheology is describing.
Mm.
So it has always boggled my mind how anybody could have looked up at the stars and been like, okay, we're going to start the process now, boys, of codifying everything that's up there, everything that we know into the names of stars and making pictures out of how we play dot to dot. And like, what if instead of somebody going through that process in sort of like an authorship way, what if it was just self-evident up there?
Mm.
And then who people would tell stories about what they saw up there in the form of entertainment to each other. And maybe somebody who was really good at telling stories from up there started to get invested with the technology of knowledge, as in the rest of the tribe was like, you know shit, you're the storyteller, you just do it. And maybe a progression went on from there that led us eventually to a further externalization of this innate capacity to know all that we are and all that is in the form of written language and letters that comes about. And we just keep on this slide of externalizing all of our capacities and capabilities into technologies or languages that describe them. And why would this even happen? And to me, I think it's like cosmomitosis, that
Mm.
that's my word for it anyway, that this mirror technology being a mirror of our innate capacities as, creators, that the further we go along this progression of the creation of technology, the more that we become able to see our full range of who and what we are and what we're capable of. And I find that fascinating. And to me, that's the biggest draw of astrotheology, is getting the thought experiment of going all the way back in time to like, how did this even come about that there was a picture book in the stars, and what does it mean? And is it something that was pre-existing there, that the word is the heavens, the sky father, the logos is up there, and that at the point that we started putting our words into on paper or on other scrolls or whatever is written language and letters, uh, that process started to take some of the innate knowing out of the sky and put it onto paper. And interestingly enough, then it became more of an interpretative game of like, how can I read the sky today? And now that we have these written languages, written letters, well, that constellation, Pegasus Square, looks kind of like a cuneiform symbol called Iku, which meant field to the Sumerians. So then at that point early on, not saying that they're like the oldest or most original, but at that point early on, we start to see the practice of our written languages now informing how we interpret what is up there. But the
Mm.
wild thing is, it still starts to give you truth or metaphysical insight through this interesting process of discovery of the various homonyms and synonyms and puns that you can derive out of looking at the sky clock. And to go back to the Sumerian example again, a great way to conceptualize this would be with like asking the question of, where does Jesus come from? And there's a lot of elements to the Jesus story and the miracle stories of the Bible, but to just like give a little sampler of the granular detail that astrotheology is able to provide in terms of an explanatory factor to how we got these wild stories of mythology and miracles in the Bible and all the other religions of the world. We look at the Regulus star within the Leo constellation, which was called by the Sumerian star atlases, like the Mul Apin, it was called Sharu. And
Shot.
Sharu could mean king or it could mean child.
Hmm.
So in that star, you have the child king, and it's around the Virgin Virgo. There's a lot of other elements of the story that are all up there too, but we're just honing in on this one star Regulus, which is one of the four royal stars and has a lot of significance as being not only one of the brightest in the sky, but making up the four corners of the fixed signs of the zodiac, where, interestingly enough, there are two bright red stars across from each other and two bright blue stars across from each other, the four royal stars, who are the four evangelists of the New Testament. And they form a cross if you were to connect the dots. And that's very interesting. But Regulus, or Sharu, king/child, could also be phoneticized with a logogram or an abbreviation that meant let me pull up my notes here.
Sure,
I was
sure.
just writing about this. The logograms get a little tricky, but a logogram is an abbreviation that they used back in the day of the cuneiform priest writers, if you will. And the logograms were like abbreviations that helped them shorthand the more complicated lines and arrows required to write out a full word like Sharu. So one of the logograms they would use was ad. And one of the meanings of ad, because these abbreviations could mean multiple things also, and they were the only ones using it. It wasn't like a public language or anything. So they were able to get like, and it was an early and primitive system. So they are kind of squirrely with it. But ad could mean, one of the meanings was father, which the word for that is Abu. Interesting that ad was father as a logogram, because we still have the ad in dad.
Yeah, right. Ad, yeah.
And the Sumerian word Abu, meaning father, is basically the same word as Ab, which is priest, or not priest, which is father in Hebrew, like Abram.
Yeah.
Father Ram, or Father Brahm, Father Brahma, Abraham. And anyway, so right there in the cuneiform, the old Star Atlas version of this Regulus star, just a single star, you have child, you have king, you have father. And then interestingly enough, the phonetic similarity between, okay, so here's this logogram representing Sharu could also be spelled in a different way. So different regions of this astronomer priest class and at different times, because they weren't all like on an internet or anything. They had their little sects and their monasteries and all that. In another place, somebody came up with a logogram for Sharu/Regulus that was pronounced Lugal. And then later on, this astrotheology arises out of the fact that you have later, followers of this system that look at what their predecessors did, and they form dictionaries and lexicons of all the possible variations, because they're going through and combing through the ancient texts kept in the temples. So Sharu could be ad, which is father, but it could also be the logogram or abbreviation that was pronounced Lugal. But Lugal had more than one reading, which was the other reading was Shar, just Shar rather than Sharu. And that was interestingly what you call, let's see, what is it called when homonym, where two words exactly sound the same, like there, and there.
Homophone,
yeah. So that Lugal, or which became Shar, was also phonetically identical to another logogram or abbreviation that meant to increase, or he increases, which is the definition of the Hebrew word Yosef, which is Joseph. So right there in just Regulus, you have the child king, who is Jesus, and his father, Ad, which is Joseph. He increases. And because the same stellar tableau, or picture of grouping of constellations, was used to create the story of his birth and his death, not only is his father named Joseph, but his benefactor, who takes his body from the cross and puts it in the tomb, which is part of the Ophiuchus constellation, was named Joseph of Arimathea, Joseph of Arithmetic. He increases. So, true believers and dogmatic followers, they never think twice about like, why is Jesus' dad and the guy that puts him in the tomb, the guy who helps him be born and the guy who buries him, are the same name? Just must have been a lot of mofos named Joseph or Yosef.
A whole lot of them, yeah. Wow, that's a great example to kind of introduce.
All just encoded in one word, one star.
These
and there's more than that in just that one star. So
the encoding,
you could get entire scriptures and huge litanies of, extensive texts out of this system of like pulling stories out of the astrologos. But to really round off the thought here about it, that I find fascinating, to go back to this being a technology and how technologies replace innate abilities, is how it's fascinating that as light pollution has increased and our ability to see the stars at night has decreased, literacy rates have gone up, which in my opinion, it may not be scientific or whatever, but to me, that demonstrates a correlation between the use of written language and the diminishing of our ability to access through the technology of our consciousness the message of the as above. Does that make sense? Light pollution up, literacy rates up, visibility of stars down. It's like a perfect correlation because now you can barely see a damn star, and almost 100% of people are illiterate. To me, there's a there, but you know,
Makes a lot of
that's
sense.
there's more
Yeah.
to dig on that.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's kind of cool too. For Thanksgiving, I went to Marfa, Texas, on my way to the Big Bend National Park, which that area is considered to be the darkest sky of the entire country. And that was really fun because I literally had never seen the full Milky Way before. Like I've seen pictures of it, but yeah, that was shocking. It's and I use that particular word shocking because it sort of like electrocuted me in some way. Like I was finally seeing beneath a veil or like behind some kind of veil that I was always hidden. And here in Dallas, it's light pollution's horrible, but it's interesting that our correlation between written tech and the sky clocks tech is that's I've never thought about that before. It's really cool that you bring that up. And I wanted to ask you in relation to the same topic. And we're now entering the season of Aquarius. The sun is in Aquarius for the next month or so. And I was curious if you had a thought, an insight, maybe an instinct. What comes up for you when you consider this new solar cycle that we're entering now?
Like just the sun in Aquarius, what that feels like.
Yeah, what it feels like to you. It's interesting to always ask people because Aquarius is a very interesting sign to me. And just because we're right at the beginning here of this solar cycle. So I'm curious if you have any insights or anything that pops in synchromistically.
Yeah, that's, I mean, as great of a question as that is, I might not have a super satisfying or heady answer for you. I'm fascinated by astrology as a sort of predictive element. You
Hmm.
know, I talk to astrologers on my show all the time, and I like to get their thoughts on these type of things. But for me personally, I have phases of paying attention and more and paying attention less.
Right.
But overall, I kind of just, I just flow with the inner feeling of how things are and what I feel like doing. And so with this current, solar period of sun in Aquarius, tropically speaking, and then there's a whole side
Yeah, that's
tangent
a
of
whole
like, well,
nother.
but
Yeah.
we're not even in, and we're maybe not even in Aquarius,
Right.
depending on if you're tropical or sidereal.
Mm.
Although I like tropical because it's based on the Earth rather
Hmm.
than on the sky, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
It's
it's
like
Earth centric. Yeah.
Earth's, yeah, geocentric, which is how I roll on all
Yeah.
ways. But that when the new moon hit for Aquarius, uh, that felt more like entering something new. Again, we talked about the Lunar New Year, than the sun hitting Aquarius, which
Yeah, that makes sense.
has it even yet? What day of the month is it? I
We're
don't
on the
know.
21st of January here.
Yeah, so I guess yeah, sun was in Aquarius if the new moon hit, like maybe like right now. And anyway, about the time it started approaching or the moon got towards Aquarius, I was definitely feeling like the some freedom
Mm.
regarding my ability to begin to do types of creative work with my own writing that I
Oh,
wasn't
nice.
feel like that, the pressure had been building up and building up. Like there's this huge pressure of like, I've got all these observations, I've got all this data and all this knowledge I've observed, but if I'm ever going to shape something out of it or be able to communicate it effectively, or even recall the things that I once knew because I'm combing over so many fine details. I mean,
Mm.
when you're studying astrotheology, it is an endless deluge of details, tiny little details that make up a big picture. Like when I just casually in a conversation throw out there how Jesus is Mercury, is Buddha, is Odin, is Hercules, is Bacchus, is Krishna, etc., etc. You know, that doesn't give people a window into the millions of myriad elements of similarity
Mm.
between those characters. Like the fact that Krishna was said to have been taken away and raised in a town that has the same name as the place in Egypt where Jesus was said to have been taken away and
Mhm.
raised as a child, both to escape a like maniacal king who wanted to slay them. King Herod, in Jesus's case, who Herod, in my opinion, is the Hydra constellation. Interestingly, you can even
Interesting.
anagram the word Herod out of Hydra if you're, a little lenient with your vowels. But
Sure.
being lenient with vowels is totally allowed in philology,
Especially in Hebrew.
especially in languages like Hebrew where they had no vowel points to begin with. But
Mm.
I use the example all the time, just that two regions of the country will say their vowels differently, or might even throw fucking part of my French consonants in there. Like, think about how the people in New England country or states might say words with a in it. It just
Yep.
becomes r. Or I saw a hilarious video of an Italian guy, uh, Italian guy and his girlfriend, and she's like recording him. She's like, "Say it again," and he holds up his bottle, his water bottle, and he's like, "My butthole is leaking."
My butt. I like
And
that.
she's like, "You're
Yeah.
saying bottle, right?" And he's like, "Butthole." So,
Classic.
or like the way the Southern drawl might
Mm.
pronounce a vowel sounds differently, but consonants stay somewhat the same, but there is also interchangeability between them. My point in all that being, to circle back around to the question about Aquarius, is that I definitely felt which Aquarius has to do with like liberation and freedom.
Yeah. Yeah.
The larger question of the age of Aquarius
Yeah.
is
Right.
fascinating too, but that I definitely felt like a bit of like the bottle had been uncorked, of some pressure buildup of my
Mm.
need to like organize and codify my own thoughts and observations into a system that I could refer to again later, so that I don't lose track of the things that I know, and so that I can bring observations and information together in a weave and tapestry that, if I just kept reading without also taking notes and without also
Yeah.
making the effort to write, that they would just get lost, grains of sand through the hourglass. And at that point, it's like almost masturbatory to just go over all of this information as I have been doing without any sort of purpose behind it. And I'm finding a passion, like I don't know, reigniting of the passion of purpose, in the sense that, yeah, I'm really happy with what I've achieved in my life so far, that I'm able to be a full-time podcaster, that I'm able to do the energy work for people. But those two sides of my life are almost like hitting a stride where there's development in it.
Mm.
I learn new things in tuning people all the time about how the biofield works, and I continue making great connections with people and learning things from them in the podcast work. But in terms of like putting effort on a regular basis towards a long-term goal, I'm feeling finally quite free and liberated to do that with my own writing. What about it sees, the light of day for the rest of the world, who knows? Or if it coalesces into a book someday that people can access, that'd be great. But in terms of just as an exercise where I organize my own thoughts, it's been
Mm.
really helpful. And just to, I've always wanted to do it. I was a creative writing major, so I've always
Nice.
thought that writing should be more important in my life, and I do creatively write my words as I speak them out loud. But
Mhm.
to be actually putting pen to paper in a notebook in a more organized fashion feels great. And in doing so, I'm immediately reaping the benefits of having original ideas
Mhm.
come to me rapidly and profoundly, like, what I just laid out about the technology of astrotheology possibly being an indicator to us of a previous time where our capacity to interconnect all human knowledge and knowledge of nature in an internet-like form was coming through our observation of the as above.
The great
Like,
remembering.
that was a pretty great remembering. And
Yeah.
writing has helped with that. So very interesting. That's why I really am seeing this concept of the technology of language and technology at large as a type of mirroring, or
Mm.
mothering, because Mary, the mother of all the different solar deities that interesting who are called the logos or the word. It's almost like somebody or something new that as we progress in technology, we begin to hold a mirror up to ourselves of what we are, who we are, what our potentials are, and the bigger picture of life, the universe, and everything. And I'm super excited to be mirroring that from just, between me and me, and that it's going nicely. And I feel the momentum building that it'll continue, and we'll see how that helps my development, going forward. But to me, I did think maybe there was something to the Aquarius vibe that was oncoming, that sort of popped the lid off the bottle as a metaphor for the water bearer
Yeah.
holding that jug and pouring out all that liquid memory, mem being the Hebrew word for water.
Yeah. Oh, that brings me right back to Austin Veda, your recent episode. I was just listening. So, but
Veda
dude,
Austin.
yeah, that
It
is
was funny that I
amazing.
had
Yeah.
Veda Austin, the water researcher, on and followed her with Austin Walters, basically
Oh, okay.
waters, talk
Yeah,
about
yeah, yeah,
magnetism.
the Walters. Yeah. Well, that's amazing, dude. I'm happy for you. It's cool that there's like a renewal in your creativity. It's taking a different form. And something that Dylan Sakosio said on your stream the other night was that, if you write down what you've been learning every day, eventually you're going to have enough for a book or two books or eight books. It's really cool. And whether or not you publish it, that's all within your control. But it's fascinating that you've began doing this, and I'm happy to hear that, and I'm inspired to do it myself. And um, as a segue, as we
Dylan,
kind
let
of,
me just
yeah,
say,
yeah, sure.
Dylan Sakosio, author of the Spirit World
Yes.
series, who I've also been producing audiobooks for,
Right.
he is a mentor in the way that Eileen Day McCusick has been a mentor for me,
Mm,
in the sense that we're, on the more honest level, we're good friends rather than like some sort of official role of teacher and student or whatever. But
yeah.
I've realized that what a mentor, at least for me, is somebody that I can look at what they're doing and learn from watching them do it, and they don't have to go out of their way to teach me anything at all, but that I can start to incorporate some of their style of how they go about a particular process and make it my own. And so in the same way that reading Eileen's books and listening to some of her podcasts and picking it up and trying the forks out for myself led me to a proficiency, I do think that Dylan's work, and in particular the opportunity to do the audiobooks for him, really helped me see his process, his methodology, and just open the windows in my mind to like, well, if I was going to start writing, how would I do it?
Mm,
And exactly like you just said, he said that in the live chat of a Vibrant last week, that if you just write down the things that you learn
mhm.
event while you're reading, eventually you could make a book out of it. And that is kind of, I'll add that instead, not just writing down, but get a physical copy of the book and start, put in highlights and whatever in it. Like you see here, I'm just like
Nice. Yeah,
chock full
yeah.
of highlights and
Right.
maybe make notes of page numbers of things. Like right here, this is something I got to talk about more someday. I'm looking at a highlighted sentence in this book, Anacalypsis by Godfrey Higgins. The cycles were like men and died of old age.
Hmm.
That's referring to the cycles of the larger cycles of time, and how a lot of mythological heroes and gods are symbolic of time cycles that were pretended to be accurate by the
Mm.
always wrong priest class. But anyway,
Interesting
I'll never
bibliomancy there, I
maybe
guess.
lose track of the idea that I want to write more about that or explore that concept more deeply, because I made a highlight in the book and I can always flip through and find my highlights.
Hmm.
Anyway, yeah, just wanted to say all that and shout out to Dylan, who's been an awesome friend to me and a really great researcher, and was happy to see that you picked up a God's Acre for Winds of the Soul and
Yeah,
have been
man.
reading
Thank you
that.
for the recommendation. I've been enjoying it. And, when you brought up Miri and the maternal energy of this universe, I'm happy that I can start to put those pieces together, those bits of our language and syntax that connect those dots cross culturally. And, as we kind of wrap up, it's been a while. It's been flying by temporally for this conversation because we've covered so much ground. And I'm happy that we got to dive into your sound consultation, if you want to call it that now, and
I like that.
astrotheology and your work with Dylan and his audiobooks. Just want to ask you what's coming up for your podcast, Interverse. Anything in particular you want to share? Any reflections on 2022? What do you want to leave our audience with today, Chance?
Well, what's coming up with Interverse is I need to get a fire under my ass to schedule some more shows. I'm a little light on my calendar right now. So, if anybody wants to do some charitable work for free of helping me schedule shows,
Sign me up, please.
but what's what's good about Interverse is that we're exploring all these ideas together, and that we have a larger community of people that are on the team. Like, especially in the Vibrant sense, I have many different regulars that I could hit up, and so I have a special guest for the live stream on Wednesday night, and then
Nice.
maybe we're talking about something on the more spiritual woo side, so I hit up Gordy
Oh,
for
cool.
that. Or maybe Slick Dissident, he's always there. Somehow he manages to be part of like everybody's
Yeah.
streams regularly. The dude is a powerhouse of positive witness, and all
Absolutely.
praise and thanks to
I was
Gabriel
just
for all.
talking to Gabriel yesterday, actually.
Yeah, I'm sure
Yeah.
that's gonna be a banger.
It
Dude
was
is
fun.
dude, yeah. He totally embodies the Leo fun. Even though
Yeah.
he claimed on his talk with Topher at Biocharisma the other day that he is a sidereal Cancer, and I'm like, dude, you are so Leo, it's ridiculous. Fuck off with your idea of Cancer. Are you really? Hey, I'm just kidding, but I'm more of a tropical guy, and I just like to give Topher shit because
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
so into sidereal. But yeah, we have all these great regulars that I can bring on for the live streams whenever they fit into the subject matter. Shout out Mario Garza of Symbolic Studies,
Yeah.
Kyle Denton of Typical New Herbs,
Mhm.
Michelle Lundquist of Michelle's Healing Home, and so many more. If I didn't say your name, it doesn't mean I don't love you. I do, but there's just a great community, and we really congregate around Telegram in the Interverse Telegram group chat, and other ones like Weaving Spiders Webs. And
Yeah. What's up, spiders?
yeah, what's up, spiders? So I would start your show earlier, and I'll hang out on it more often. I've been kind
Yeah,
of
I
not.
can't stay awake too long. Yeah.
It's tough for me lately,
Yeah.
but and then with reflecting on 2022, which maybe I haven't done as much as I haven't really done. I'm kind of a very forward oriented thinker. And by kind of, I mean very. Like, I just don't hold a lot of conscious memory of the past,
Yeah,
of my
probably for the
own story, my
best.
own past.
Yeah.
But there are some great highlights on the 2022 playlist, like Matt Powers, the permaculture, unstoppable enthusiasm citizen scientist, or John Monroe, the qigong teacher who I learned from.
Nice.
Phenomenal. Or a conversation I had with Benjamin Balderson about laboratory alchemy that will really make the alchemical process click for you, about like how that expresses in nature. Some just good stuff. Just going forward, I have kind of got some ambition to do more solo content.
Nice.
And we'll see how that goes. I'm definitely not trying to announce an announcement, but maybe I'll see more episodes where it's me bringing my own personal research forward. But
Right on.
a lot of that just gets caught in guest spots where I'm a guest on someone else's show. So if you like the way that I prattle on incessantly about this and that, then hit me up and I'll come on your show too, people out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Hit him up. Hit him up.
And I want to say thanks for
yeah.
having me on here.
Oh, of course, man.
You've you've been a great friend since you came into the community as well, and a super helpful supporter that actually shares the content around in a way where you're trying to draw people to it, which I appreciate. That puts you in the top upper echelon of the 1% of the 1% of listeners who actually will do me a solid and like try to get other people to check it out, because that's the only way that this good stuff spreads. And so people out there listening to Jake, do him the same solid and post it to your Telegram group chats, or I would say social media is pretty much worthless, but what I used to say all the time is like, Fuck a link. Tell somebody that you're friends with personally.
Mm,
Tell them about the show and why you like it, not just send them a link.
I
And
like
then
that. Yeah.
I think that goes a lot further. One to one connection, where you just tell one person that you think would
Mm,
like it about it. That's more, that one person showing up is a lot more valuable than a mass reach scatter shot attempt to post a link to as many people as possible. So anyway, you're doing great. Keep your momentum up and don't sweat it if you feel less productive for a time and
mm,
want to focus on other areas. Don't beat yourself up with guilt like we talked about, and keep that hip
exactly.
strong. And I'll come back anytime, and well, definitely have to do it again, buddy.
Absolutely, my friend. I appreciate you. This has been awesome, and I'm looking forward to what's to come in 2023 and this lunar new year and everything and anything beyond. And I appreciate you, brother. Hope you have a fantastic day.
Thanks, dude. Talk to you later.
Peace.